Okay, I am reading Snow Treasure, and I'm actually reading chapter 20, but I got cut off at the very end of chapter 19. So I'm going to just read the end of 19 and start into 20. So the mom says she'll pull the kids. She meant to anyway, for the looks of it, Peter. Tomorrow and the next day, Mrs. Berg and Miss Olson and some of the others are going to go down and take the babies. Peter understood. Anything to throw the Germans off the scent, for unless the spies already knew everything, no one would look for anything out of order from a woman with a sled load of children. We can carry a little gold too, his mother said. Every bit counts, and the snow isn't going to last forever. So now we start chapter 20. Peter transferred the gold from the bobsled to his own sled. He gave his mother a start, for he knew he could overtake her whenever he wished. Mrs. Lundstrom sat on the bobsled and steered it skillfully. But with the children on it, she didn't dare take the long stretches with the speed Peter would have made. Down on the beach, he was angry to find his mother the object of much curiosity. Soldiers were filing into the open space before the barracks. Their drill master made them stand at attention while she pulled the long sled past their lines. The drill master froze in stiff salute. Thank the merciful heavens he had not said, "Hail Hitler," Peter breathed in relief, for she would have had to make some reply, and Peter knew his mother was not one to praise a man who had brought evil to her country, and yet she would have had to say something. If she had refused, well, anything could have happened. People were sent to concentration camps for as little a thing as that, for failing to exalt the German leader. Peter wanted to tie his sled to the long one to help his mother pull the children over the level stretch, but she told him to go ahead. "It's the looks of the thing, Peter," she whispered. He was glad he had gone on when a minute later, and here's a picture of her pulling the sled and the kids in front of all the German soldiers. A minute later, he heard the voice of the commandant. Peter knew he was addressing his mother, but he dared not turn around to look. He'd been lucky to escape as lightly as he had the day the officer stopped him and asked him if he would like to be his servant. "Good morning, good lady. You've a fine day for your sled ride." Peter knew his precise Norwegian accent. His mother made no answer. "If you like, I'll have one of my men pull that sled," he spoke politely. Still, his mother was silent. Then from up the beach, Peter could see Lieutenant Sit-Down coming toward him and toward the commandant. He had a paper in his hand. He paid no attention to Peter, but went rapidly toward the chief officer. Peter could just make out the click of his heels as he bowed in salute. He must have handed the paper to the commandant, for there was silence as the latter was reading a message. Then the commandant addressed the lieutenant in German. Peter knew only a little German, but he had no difficulty making out what was said. "These Norwegians, have they no manners? There's so many bores. Or is it the ears they lack? There was a boy here one day. I offered to let him help me with my orderlies. He acted as if he couldn't hear." Peter dug into the snow as hard as he could. He was that boy. He was afraid the commandant might recognize his back. He reached the cliff that hid the snake. From there, he watched his mother pulling hard on the rope of the bobsled. It seemed to him that she would never arrive at the wall that would hide her from the eyes of those hundreds of Germans. Slowly, she traveled the snow. She had to turn into the valley before Peter dared give her a hand on the rope. "But the snow soldiers are all knocked down," she noted. "That means that Victor and Rolls came out last night and loaded the gold you children brought yesterday. Could you and Helga possibly be mistaken?" "Helga's nearly always right," Peter spoke ruefully. It was a sore point. Helga had been right and he was wrong in so many disputes. If Helga says she's seen anything, you can be pretty sure she has. Mrs. Lundstrom had to agree. Helga was known as bright throughout Westwick. "Anyway, I thought I saw a soldier on skis just before we turned into Holmes Farm last night. He would have had to come from here. There's nowhere else he could have come from." "In any event," the mother said, "we'll have to tell Uncle Victor so he can be on guard. Now the thing to do is to find the boat." Mrs. Lundstrom drew from her pocket a drawing of the snake with the Clayton Pearson marked with a cross. "But that's right here," she said. "Here are the 2 fallen trees." "There's no boat here," Peter announced triumphantly. "I looked for it every day, and I've not seen it yet." "I think the children will be safe while we look," his mother said. "Bunny, you and Dag and Ingrid make a snow castle, a great big one. Look, I'll help you start it." She dropped on the snow beside them, and Peter stood the bobsled on its end. It would screen them a little from the wind. Then he untied the bricks he had transferred from his mother's sled to his own. These he buried in a drift. In no time at all, a snowman was standing guard over them. And now for the Clayton Pearson. But although it was nearly clearly marked in the drawing, there was nothing on it to be seen. Not a spar, not a bloom, not a foot on the mast. Only the everlasting snow, the pines and the jutting cliffs that made pincers around the black rushing stream and its narrow borders of land. Peter and his mother walked to the very edge of the water. In the little wooded strip, they saw a strange new kind of vegetation. The forest seemed to dance. Pines they thought rooted in the bank now seemed to have no roots at all, but were bobbing up and down with the rush of the current. And now that they were in part of the valley where something was amiss, they could see other strange sights. Through the thick brush on the bank, they could just about make out the Clayton Pearson. But what a strange Clang Pearson. Pines were growing right out of her hole. Her mast was a towering evergreen. The branches thickened at the crow's nest and then tapered to a stately point. A pretty good job of camouflage, don't you think? A voice spoke softly at their side. Both of them jumped in fright. Chapter 21. It was Uncle Victor who had spoken. It took some minutes for Mrs. Lundstrom and Peter to recover from their astonishment. When they did, they realized that they were being shown up a fur-screened gangplank. At its head stood Rolls, the mate, with a hand to help them alight on the dancing deck. But you're not the ones to be surprised, Victor was saying. What about me? I was expecting the 2 teams as usual. Instead, I find only you 2 and Bunny and his friends. The Clang Pearson was a fishing smack of 15 tons. She had been built long before Uncle Victor's time for the herring industry. She carried a sloop rig and could set a course and square sail. But Uncle Victor had installed a 13-horsepower engine, so the Clang had no need to wait for a wind but could travel under her own force at all times. When newer and finer boats were built in the shipyards of the coast, people would ask Victor Lundstrom why he didn't get one. Why do you sail that tub? They would question, knowing he could afford the finest. To people who spoke in such fashion, Uncle Victor had little to say, but Peter knew what his uncle thought about the Clang. There was never such a ship in the whole history of navigation, he once told Peter. She's the sturdiest thing afloat, and she's as easy to manage as a kitten. As for capacity, well, for her size, she's the best of anything you've ever heard of. Why, I could carry food and fuel for 5 years if I ever decided to make a polar expedition. When Uncle Victor bought the smack years ago, he changed her name. There were those who asked why the name Clang Pearson, but Peter knew why his uncle called the boat he loved after one of his heroes. Clang Pearson was the Norseman who went to America and who, because of his bravery in the face of hardships, was called the Norwegian Daniel Boone. I'll give you tea, although I didn't expect visitors. Uncle Victor showed them into his cabin. One of the greatest thrills of Peter's childhood was to have tea aboard the Clang, but alas, invitations were hard to get. Uncle Victor was a busy man with his fishing crews, and the Clang was at sea much of the time. It was also cheery and bright aboard the ship. In the cabin, Peter could see his face reflected in a dozen different surfaces. It was spotless, as only a ship's cabin can be. Leather bunks along 2 sides served as seats in the daytime. Over one of these were 2 portholes, darkened now by the camouflage shrubbery outside, but there were peepholes in the shrubbery, and through them came a jagged, broken light. A large round table centered the cabin. It was fastened to the deck, and above it hung a lamp on a chain. About the only other thing of importance was a large map of Europe as it was in the 1930s. This map was draped with the red field and white-bordered blue cross of the flag of Norway. And what is the news of Lars? Victor asked about his brother. There's little to tell, Mrs. Lundstrom said sadly. His regiment got to Trondheim, and that's about all we know. Now, Peter's dad is off fighting. There's been fierce fighting there. Uncle Victor lit a spirit lamp. He told what he had been able to learn about the army. His visitors listened eagerly. Then Mrs. Lundstrom explained the purpose of their visit. We didn't come to make a social call, she said. I don't dare leave Bunny and the others very long. They may get tired and wander away. We came to warn you that someone may be watching you. Helga Thompson said she heard something and saw someone move down here yesterday. Then Peter saw a German soldier on skis come out of the trail from here that cuts the road near the homes. Uncle Victor looked grave. It could have been Rolls or me that Helga saw. We've been watching every move these youngsters make. They haven't come once that one or the other of us hasn't stood guard. Yes, we thought as much, Mrs. Lundstrom said. We talked of that last night when Herr Holm brought the news. I wouldn't have given it a thought if Peter hadn't seen the soldiers on skis come out of the trail. Uncle Victor had set the kettle on a spirit lamp and now lifted the lid to see if it was boiling. You could tell from the snow prints, Peter suggested. Yes, we could, after a distance, but it's pretty well trampled around here with Rolls and me going out night after night to bring the gold aboard. But one of us will go up the trail tonight and see, his uncle answered. But the curfew? Uncle Victor only laughed, and he made the tea and poured it and passed the cups to the guests. There were spice cakes that Rolls brought in from the galley. There's no such thing as being too cautious about spies, Uncle Victor said after a time. But if anyone had been here in the daylight, surely Rolls or I would have seen him. Of course, I did take 40 winks yesterday afternoon when the children were here. You see, when the 2 of us dig and carry on board almost 1,000 pounds of gold, it's pretty late and we're tired. We've things to do in the morning to get ready to sail, so we have to catch up on our sleep when we can. But Rolls was around, weren't you, old fellow? Yes, I was, said Rolls, but when I saw Peter, I knew everything would be all right. I left my pipe on board and I came back just long enough to smoke a pipeful. Then someone could have been around and neither you or I would have known. Is there much more gold to load? Victor asked his sister-in-law after a pause. No, you nearly have all of it. Per Garson's been checking. The last of next week will finish it, and it won't be 6 weeks until Tuesday. We've been lucky, Victor. Think if the thaws had come earlier. Well, you can't get it down here too soon to suit me, he stirred his tea. The business of hanging around isn't exactly safe. You mean you're ready to sail? Peter asked. As soon as the gold's loaded, you can go to America? That's right, son. That's exactly what I mean. Then you know where the mines are laid. Sure, I've known them for weeks since we entered the war on the side of Britain and France. So hurry and get the gold down here so I can be underway. It'll be bad enough for the rest of you if we're caught, but Rolls and I would be shot. Oh, Uncle Victor, don't worry. We're not going to get caught. It's too much money to give the Germans. And anyway, I'd like to see New York again. And that is the end of both chapter 20 and 21 of Snow Treasure.